here at the Chartered Institute, and it's my delight to welcome you all to Customs Corner Live. We are doing a live version covering the latest developments in customs and trade news. It's been a tumultuous few months for traders, and I think no better time than now to launch the first of what hopefully will be the latest in a series of events. So if you are new to the Chartered Institute, just by way of introduction, we are the foremost association for importers, exporters, and supply chain professionals, with a mission to empower global trade by equipping businesses and individuals with the expertise needed to trade compliantly, sustainably, and profitably. We do this through a range of educational and advisory services, and we also form and connect with our members, helping to meet like-minded trade professionals, to share best practice, and stay up to date on ever-changing rules and procedures. But enough from me. I'd like to welcome today's speakers on the next slide. First, we have Anna Doherty. Anna will be taking to the latest changes to trade and customs. Anna, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Apologies, a little bit of technological delay here.
No worries, live event, these things happen. Yeah, I will hand over to Anna in a second, but on the next slide, we do have a guest speaker from HMRC, Simon Pettigrew. Simon, how are you?
Hi, Phil. Hi, all. Yeah, very good, and thank you very much for having me today.
No problem. Thank you for coming. So Simon's going to be talking through the latest changes on the Windsor framework, but before we get to that, I'd like to mention a quick thing about membership on the next slide. So while this session is free to attend, we regularly host a number of member-only events and send out exclusive insights on customs and trade. If you want to be a member of our future events, which include member lunchtime learnings or read through our handy insights, please consider joining the Chartered Institute. You can scan the QR code there. On March 27th, we have a deep dive on the EU's ICS2 programme, a Q&A on the General Product Safety Regulation, and a practical session on the rules of origin. However, that's enough from me. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. I'll be talking through a few things today, some that have already happened and impacted kind of processes at the borders, some that are still yet upcoming. We're not being limited to UK only because we're also looking at some of the changes that are going to be happening to the EU border. Now, please note that we only have 45 minutes, so we are only able to cover some of this information on a high level detail, but this is a Q&A session, so hopefully we'll be able to answer as many questions as come through. I would like to talk about NCTS 5, and if I could have the next slide, please. So what is NCTS? And those of you that move goods on the transit will be very well aware of what is NCTS. NCTS is new computerized transit system, although the name is new. It's not that new because we're on its 5th iteration now and we'll be coming up to the 6th one pretty soon. NCTS is a system that is operated by the European Commission for Common Transit Convention countries. Each country has its own kind of gateway to the NCTS that it uses to connect, and those systems talk to each other. And transit is used for movement of goods across multiple borders, where the customs formalities are only started and finished in the first and the last country. So it allows for goods to be moved across multiple countries with the suspension of the customs duties, taxes, but also any non-tariff requirements until the goods reach their destination. Can I have the next slide, please? NCTS 5 has been implemented in the UK on the 1st of July 2024, and actually it was 28th of June 2024 for Northern Ireland and 1st of July for Great Britain. It's been deployed in several stages, and what that meant is that while we had some functionality in July, we have had the full functionality of what NCTS 5 brings has not been implemented until 21st of January 2025. 5. The functionalities that have been implemented make it easier to apply kind of digital processes between the member states and provide simplifications to all the users of the transit processes. Next slide, please. So what has actually happened on the 21st of January 2025? Well, we moved to what is called final state rules. By that point, all CTC convention countries needed to have implemented NCTS 5 and switch on the final state rules. And what that brought is several new things that users of transit need to be aware of. And obviously, we've now had this for a few weeks. So those of you that do use transit will be well aware of this. Funny thing is, a lot of importers and exporters, they may not even realize that they're going to move on the transit because, as I said, transit relates to movement, and a lot of the time it will be used by the hauliers or by the freight forwarders. But it's also interesting to know for importers and exporters about the various processes that happen at the border and the various systems and how they interact with each other. One of the things that final state rules have brought in as part of NCTS 5 is a new designation of an office of incident. So customs officers en route from point of exit to point of entry or transit are designated as either as office of departure, office of transit, or office of destination. They all perform slightly different functions. We now also have an office of incident, meaning that if there's any incident along the route, something happens to either the goods or the vehicle, then the driver that is driving the truck that's moving on the transit needs to make sure to report to the nearest office of incident to where the incident has taken place. This means that the incident can be communicated to the office of destination, and that will hopefully result in a lower dwell time in terms of resolving the incident. What is also necessary is a provision of commodity codes and on each item in the declaration, in the transit declaration. Now, we do have a little bit of difference here between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In Great Britain, only first 6 digits of the commodity code need to be entered. In Northern Ireland, up to 8 digits can be entered. So there is a slight variation there. We also have multiple house consignment functionality, and that is supporting those transit declarants with significant volumes, meaning that they can potentially reduce some of the number of declarations that they have to do because they have now can have multiple house consignment within a single transit declaration. We also seen a removal of the mandatory requirement to carry a paper transit accompanying document. What that means is that transit declarations can now be presented electronically, and instead of carrying out a printed TAD, a driver only needs to have the MRN number or the barcode. Now, it doesn't mean that you can no longer use a paper TAD. You absolutely can, and that functionality has not been removed, but for those businesses that prefer not to, there are the electronic ways. However, what it does mean is that MRNs must be presented electronically at border locations. And so when using locations such as those under the GVMS, the transit MRN for inbound movements must be included in the GMR so that the transit can be electronically presented. Another part of the changes on the NCTS 5 is the change in the pre-lodgement mechanisms for transit declarations. There is now an additional method to pre-lodge a transit declaration that will allow amendments within that declaration, and that pre-lodgement can be done up to the 30 days before the declaration is accepted. There's also been a change to the business continuity process or a fallback method. And those of you that use transit, you would have had to use the fallback last week on Friday because there's been an update to NCTS 5 that resulted in the need to implement the fallback procedure. And previously, under the previous NCTS systems, you could use a C88 or the SAD, the single administrative document. That functionality is no longer there. And now if a fallback is implemented, that means that a transit user will need to print out the TAD, the transit accompanying document, which can be printed out either from the software that is used to connect to NCTS, and if that's not available, then it can be printed out from the transit manual. We are going to be seeing changes to further changes changes when NCTS 6 is being implemented later this year. However, a lot of that will not really impact the transit user. As such, the changes will mainly be in the back systems and how the CTC countries communicate with each other. However, if there's anything that is changing for the transit users, we'll obviously bring that to your attention and let you know. Next slide, please. So now I would like to talk about the removal of the ENS waiver in Great Britain. If I can have the next slide, please. ENS is a type of safety and security declaration. It's an entry summary declaration, and entry summary declarations have been in place since the UK, as part of the WCO countries' safe framework, implemented safety and security declarations following. To be fair, the trigger for it was the 9/11, but the safety and security declarations have been in place since 2011. They are separate to a customs declaration, and they serve different purposes. While a customs declaration deals with the customs status of the goods, such as the customs origin, any duty, any preferential treatment under the free trade agreement, the safety and security declaration, as the name suggests, deal with the safety and security of the movement. And therefore, it's used by other government agencies at the board as well to establish whether those goods are, what is the risk of those goods within the movement not being what they are, whether there is any opportunity for smuggling. So the post-EU exit, the UK has had a waiver on ENS requirements, meaning the inbound safety and security declaration from the EU and few other countries, and that waiver has been removed on the 31st of January 2025. And therefore, all the goods arriving into Great Britain from the EU and those other countries now need to be accompanied by an ENS entry summary declaration. Next slide, please. How do you submit a safety and security declaration? Those declarations are submitted into not into CDS, which is the system for customs declaration in Great Britain, but actually into a separate system, SNSGB. To do this, the declarant that wishes to complete a safety and security declaration needs to have an EORI number. And also, they need to understand that the SNSGB does not have a user interface. And therefore, in order to submit safety and security declarations, declarants would either need to purchase a compatible software, develop it themselves, because there are opportunities to do that as well, or employ the services of a community system provider, or indeed a declarant that they can use to lodge those declarations for them. Next slide, please. I'll just a little briefly explain about the requirements for the ENS in Great Britain. As part of the waiver removal, there have been simplifications made to ENS declarations. Now, ENS is needed for goods coming in from the EU, but also from the rest of the world. And as part of the waiver removal, one of the simplifications is the change into which fields are actually necessary for completion in the ENS declarations. There is now 20 mandatory fields, 8 conditional fields, and 9 optional fields, which can be left blank. However, those traders or those declarants that have been doing ENS for the rest of the world imports, they can continue doing them as they are. All of the fields are remaining available in SNSGB. Note that commodity code is optional for the ENS in Great Britain. Instead, a good quality description is necessary to be able to provide the border force and other border agencies with accurate information about the movement. ENS is the legal responsibility of the carrier, and who the carrier is, it depends on the mode of transport. Of course, a lot of the freight that comes in from the EU moves on the RoRo, so roll on the roll of freight. And for RoRo freight, who the carrier is will depend whether the goods are unaccompanied or accompanied. Where the goods are accompanied with the driver, so the driver stays on the truck, then the haulier is responsible for the ENS declaration. Where the goods are unaccompanied, meaning left in a container at one port, loaded onto either a vessel or a ferry and offloaded at the other side, the party responsible for making sure that the ENS is in place is the operator of the active means of transport, meaning the ferry. However, who will lodge the ENS can be a commercial decision between all parties. It doesn't necessarily need to be the haulier or the carrier. It could be the exporter, it could be the importer. It's a commercial conversation between all the parties, and as long as whoever is lodging the ENS does it in the timely manner, which again is dependent on the mode of transport, and it's always pre-departure, and they have all of the information that is necessary to complete all of the mandatory or the conditional fields, then anybody can be doing the ENS declaration. However, they will be responsible for the accuracy and the quality of that data. At the moment, ENS MRN is not mandatory for inclusion into the GMR at the GVMS ports. However, if the ENS MRN is available, it can be added into the GMR. Next slide, please. Oh, so that was all on the GB ENS for me. And before we move on to ICS2 changes, here is Phil.
Indeed, thanks, Anna. Just a quick one for me to give Anna a bit of a break. I know that's quite a lot to get through. I'd like to mention another Institute's benefits for members are practical toolkits, which cover a whole host of different topics, including CDS and the Border Target Operating Model. These are meant to give you hands-on documents as well as practical guidance on a whole host of different topics. We've also had a couple of questions in. Firstly, yes, we will be sharing the slides as well as recording in the post-webinar follow-up. The second point to note is we do have a Q&A section planned. We have got a lot to get through, but if we do manage to get through that, okay, please do fire your questions in. As always, the reminder is please keep your questions as as general as possible, and shorter questions are likely to be a bit easier to read out, so are probably going to be prioritized over long questions. That's it from me. Back over to you, Anna.
Thank you. So sticking with the theme of the ENS, it's not just the UK that has had changes for the safety and security. The EU is also changing its system for the safety and security declarations. And if I could have the next slide, please. ICS2, so import control system, is a system that the EU uses for multiple purposes, and one of them being the safety and security information. ICS2 is replacing ICS1, and that has happened over several releases. The release 1, which was launched in March 2021, covered all postal and express consignment. Release 2 in March 2023 applies to all goods in air traffic. So at the moment, we're partway through release 3, with the last step remaining for implementation for road and rail carriers, and that's what I will be focusing on next. Note that release 3 has already been in place for maritime and inland waterway cargo. So next slide, please. So why are we talking about ICS2 with it being an EU system when this is mainly for our UK audience? So similarly as the UK requires ENS data for goods arriving into GB from the EU needs ENS data from the UK post-Brexit. That has been needed from day one, and the only changes are now is that it's a different system that is being implemented and slightly different information that it's necessary to be provided. There is a deployment period for the last phase of ICS2. So the go live date for rail and road services is 1st of April, so it is coming up very, very quickly. However, the deployment window for rail and road will last until 1st of September. Economic operators had the opportunity to request access to the deployment window by 1st of March. So those of you that would have been those of you that did that, they would have had the opportunity to kind of extend the requirements for compliance with ICS2 until the 1st of September. Those that did not will need to start complying with ICS2 requirements when ICS2 goes live for that mode of transport for the ports that you're using. So whether this is through France, through Belgium, through Netherlands, through Germany. On the ICS2, commodity code is mandatory, so it's 6 digits for each item, as well as a detailed goods description. So this is where there is a slight change, slight difference with the ENS in Great Britain, in that for us, commodity code is optional. If you have it, you can put it in. For EU, the HS code at 6 digits is mandatory in ICS2 declarations. Other information that's needed is those relating to all the parties and transport information. Note that when we're talking about the ENS, it's not just about, and this is valid for both GB and the EU, it's not just about where your product has come to you on its last leg of the journey, it's where that product first started. So if you have goods that are coming in into GB where they were starting their journey in Poland, then it's not enough to know that the goods are physically coming through you. The last place is France. You need to know the whole journey of that product as it traveled to the GB. Some member states already require the ENS to be provided as part of the movement. For instance, in Ireland, if you're moving goods from GB to Ireland, you will be familiar with the pre-boarding notification, PBN, that requires the completion of both the pre-lodged import entry as well as the ENS MRN, and without the PBN, you will not be able to board the ferry departing for Ireland. Next slide, please. Now, ENS in Northern Ireland, the ENS declaration has been needed in Northern Ireland since the end of the transition period. At the moment, the Northern Ireland has a separate system for ENS declaration, ICS-NI, and this system will be replaced by ICS2 once that goes live in Northern Ireland. ICS2 deployment window in Northern Ireland runs from the 1st of April 2025 and will indeed last until 1st of September 2025. And SNS declarants must inform HMRC of the dates that they intend to start using ICS2. Those of you that are currently using TSS for your movement, then please speak to TSS, because TSS of course has the functionality for the ENS declarations, but there are also other ways to lodge your ENS declarations through either access directly into ICS2 or by using third-party software. Because Northern Ireland for ENS follows the EU rules, on the ICS2 commodity code will become mandatory at 6 digits for all of the items within the ENS declaration. And also the ENS MRN is mandatory for inclusion into the GMR for the movements into Northern Ireland. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, back to you, Phil.
Thanks, Anna. So we're going to move on to Simon's session in a second, but before we do, I'd like to mention our new customs advisory practice, which I believe Anna is heavily involved in. So it was formally launched last week at MEMNICON 25 in Leeds. Business and trade professionals can now turn customs compliance from being a hurdle into an opportunity with the new customs advisory practice from the Chartered Institute, aimed to help traders navigate these new rules and to audit and enhance their compliance processes. So if you're interested, please scan. We do have a free guide on building your confidence in customs compliance. So do feel to have a look there. But on the next slide, I'd like to welcome back Simon.
No, it's still me.
Apologies.
Still me.
Sorry,
still
Simon.
More changes. Apologies, but now there's more changes before we can move on to Simon.
Apologies, Simon. I was a little bit too keen to learn about the Winter Framework. Back to you, Anna.
No, unfortunately, there's more changes happening to the GB and EU border, as well as ICS2. France is introducing obligatory logistics envelope, ELO. And if I could have the next slide, please. So obligatory logistics envelope, and apologies, I'm just going to call it an ELO because otherwise we'll be sitting here forever for me trying to spell it out. Will be available from the 1st of April 2025 and will become mandatory from 1st of September 2025. So as you all know, these dates are very familiar because it's the same dates as the ICS2 and the deployment window for rail and ro-ro freight. And of course, a lot of the freight that moves between Great Britain and France is indeed rail and ro-ro freight. The ELO is complementary to SI Brexit. So if you're already following processes necessary to move the goods across the border between Great Britain and the EU in France, then you will have additional steps that you will need to follow, but you will not need to change any of the steps that you're currently doing. All of the systems currently operational in France will remain operational. ELO introduces a single reference to be used at the France-GB border, similar to the GMR in the UK or the PBN in Ireland. It will be a place where you can enter all of the information necessary relating to the movement under a single reference and present that single reference at the point of entry or exit. There are changes happening depending on who you are as part of the movement. Drivers will only need to present a single barcode, and in that barcode there should be all of the references relating to the movement of the product. Economic operators, that is being either the importers or the exporters, you'll need to adapt your operating procedures to ensure compliance. You will need to designate a single person to create the ELO. Now, that doesn't mean that this has to be a single person for all of your movements. Of course, depending on the type of the movements and the supply chain partners that. Apologies, I just muted myself accidentally. New laptop. You will need to understand your supply chain, you will need to understand your processes, and you need to make sure that you have somebody that actually has access to the system. So Product account, that is your ELO manager. That person will be responsible for the creation of the ELO and will use the ELO interface once they have gathered all the data from other economic operators in the supply chain. Next slide, please. So you will have a single ELO per truck, just like we have with the PBN for Ireland or with the GMR for Great Britain. You will also need an ELO for an empty truck. So when you log on to the portal, when you log on to the interface, you will be asked to answer several questions that will determine what other information will need to be included in the ELO. A single barcode will contain all the declaration information, including the ENS, the import, transit, or export declarations, as well as other additional information about the goods, such as if these are SPS goods, if these are controlled goods, if there's any additional layers or certifications or other systems involved in the movements of the goods now. So ELO is going to be starting from the 1st of April, but it will not become mandatory until the 1st of September. So what can you do now? Well, depending on where you sit in the movement of the product or of the movement of the goods, there are different steps that you need to be taking. Overall, the entire supply chain must understand their responsibilities and agree who's going to be doing what. You'll need to review the information that will need to be provided for the ELO and understand who can supply that information to you. Of course, if you're the haulier, if you're creating the ELO, you will need to have access to all of the declarations and all of the MRNs. Between all the parties in the supply chain, you need to decide who will be responsible for the creation of the ELO, and this may be different for different flows of goods. So if you're an importer from France or an exporter an importer from the EU through France or an exporter to the EU through France, your different flows may need different ELO managers. There may need to be different people responsible for the different parts of creation of the ELO. You of course need to adapt your processes to make sure you can access all of the relevant information at the right time. These are all the information that we currently have from French Customs. Of course, as ELO becomes live and then it becomes mandatory, when we get more information, we will be sharing that with you and making sure that you have everything that you need in order to move your goods compliantly and without the delays. And that will be it from me. Thank you ever so much, and I'm ready for some Q&A after Simon's session.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you again all for having me here today. As I said, my name's Simon Pettigrew and I work in the Northern Ireland Customs Policy team in HMRC, and here to talk about the Windsor framework and the new arrangements that will be coming into effect shortly. Before we go into some of the specifics, I thought worth just setting a bit of the scene, and obviously, as you all no doubt be aware, the Windsor framework was agreed between the UK and the EU in February of 2023, and that set out a new arrangement for the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and replaced the previous Northern Ireland Protocol. Since the Windsor framework was agreed, it has been implemented in phases, and we are obviously looking now at the final implementation of the customs arrangements for those goods moving into into Northern Ireland from Great Britain. The first thing I'd like to touch on, if we can move on to the next slide, is around the UK Internal Market Scheme. So the UK Internal Market Scheme came into effect in September 2023, and that replaced the previous UK Trader Scheme. So that has been open since September 2023 and will remain open. So if you have that, then that is great. If you do not have authorisation under the UK Internal Market Scheme and you wish to do so, you can submit an application now or in the future, but it's definitely remaining open for anyone who wishes to apply. What UKIMS does is it allows businesses who are moving their goods into Northern Ireland that are for sale to or final use by end consumers in Northern Ireland or in elsewhere in Great Britain to declare those goods as not at risk of entering the EU. And that allows those goods to move without any duty being due on those movements. There are some specific requirements around having a UKIMS authorisation. That we have a lot of guidance on this on gov.uk, but the main thing is that the business who has the UKIMS authorisation will have to have evidence that the goods will not enter the European Union and hold that in their records. As part of the UKIMS authorisation process, there are a few questions that we ask that you submit an application on gov.uk, and a couple of tips that we've been sharing with businesses who don't have an authorisation currently are: if you're not established in Northern Ireland, i.e. if you're established in the rest of Great Britain, you will require an indirect customs representative. So if you're moving goods through the Trader Support Service, the indirect representative can be the TSS. If, for example, if you're going to move parcels through a fast parcel operator or another courier, it may be them, or it could be another customs agent or intermediary. That is one thing to note when you're submitting your application form, as we will ask for that. And we'll also ask for information around how you will hold the evidence in your records around the goods meeting the criteria of not entering the European Union and being for sale to or final use by end consumers in Northern Ireland. So very important to make it clear in that application how you'll be doing that, so we can confirm that meets the eligibility scheme. One thing to note is if there's goods that are moving from a business into Northern Ireland where there is no UKIMS authorised business in the supply chain, those goods may have to move at risk of entering the EU, and if that's the case, they may have to pay the applicable rate of duty. That is subject to any claims of preference, any waivers or any reliefs that could be applied to those goods. A couple of things that we have been asked recently that I thought would be useful just to call out here, just to help make people understand the specifics around UKIMS and the changes specifically that UKIMS brought in compared to the previous UK Trader Scheme. Now, the UK Trader Scheme previously was only available to businesses who were established in Northern Ireland. That has now changed under UKIMS. UKIMS is open to any business that's established in the whole of the United Kingdom. So if you're established in England, Scotland or Wales, you can apply. It is also open to any business involved in the supply chain. So it can be the GB supplier of the goods, the NI recipient of the goods, but it can also be any business involved in the movement of goods. The important thing is that someone would have that authorisation and have the information to show those goods meet the eligibility of the scheme. There also was some expansions to the criteria for goods that are moving into Northern Ireland that are subject to commercial processing. So there's now a commercial processing limit for the UKIMS authorised business to have a turnover of £2 million, which increased from £500,000. And we've also introduced some specific sectoral exemptions for goods that are moving in for construction in Northern Ireland, goods that are moving in to produce foods that are sold to consumers, also goods that are for healthcare and non-profit, and also animal feed. So there's specific exemptions that may allow those goods to move under UKIMS as well, expanding the number of goods that can move under this scheme. Now, sort of looking forward, as I said, we are looking to implement the final elements of the customs arrangements under the Windsor framework. And if we can move on to the next slide, I'll touch on some of the things that you'll expect to come in shortly. So the key thing here is that if a business is authorised under the UK Internal Market Scheme, you will then shortly be able to benefit from the facilitations that will come in for goods that are moving under that scheme. So again, if you do not have this authorisation now, you can make sure that you apply for it, and businesses, you will then be able to benefit from these once these come into effect. And there are sort of three main facilitations that I'll touch on today that are coming in as part of these new arrangements. The firstly is the Internal Market Movement Information, or IMI. Now, this is a simplified data set that will be available to businesses moving goods under the UK Internal Market Scheme. And that will remove the need for a full customs declaration for goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So at present, regardless of whether the goods are at risk or not at risk, the same paperwork is needed for those goods. However, when the new arrangements for the Windsor Framework come into effect, goods that are moving under the UK Internal Market Scheme will not require a full customs declaration and can instead move under the IMI. Now, the IMI itself reduces the number of data fields that is required. I think it comes down from about 75 to about 35, depending on the movement. And it also removes some of the most complex information. So, for example, if you're moving goods that are classed as standard goods or category 2 goods, these can move with a 6 or 8-digit commodity code as opposed to currently a 10-digit commodity code. And it also removes some of the other more complex customs information such as customs valuation, Incoterms, etc. We have also established a new UKIMS EIDR authorisation. So the first thing I'd like to point out is the UKIMS EIDR does not replace the current SCDP EIDR. So if you're approved for that, there is nothing you need to do. Also, if you're benefiting from the TSS's EIDR authorisation or any other customs agents or intermediaries authorisation, there is nothing you need to do to change this. This is a new facilitation that we've agreed under the Windsor Framework to allow businesses who only really trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, perhaps don't trade internationally, to be able to benefit from the facilitation that EIDR offers. There are some specific requirements around that. Again, that the business has to be established in Northern Ireland for that, and it can only be for goods that are moving not at risk under UKIMS. But it is a simpler process for businesses who want to do that compared to the standard international EIDR authorisation that is available. But as I say, if you already have that authorisation or you're benefiting from someone else's authorisation, there is nothing else that you need to do. You do not need to replace this or apply for something else on top of that. The final thing that we'd like to touch on is the Trader's Good Profile. So this is a new and quite novel system that HMRC has developed to help facilitate some of the trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, every business who has access to a Trader's Good Profile will have a UKIMS authorisation number. And what the Trader's Good Profile basically is a database of the goods that a trader regularly moves. And this will hold the most complex information and help populate the IMI when those goods move. So it will hold information such as commodity code, it will hold information such as country of origin, it will also hold any document codes, any authorisation numbers such as authorisations under the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, which is a DEFRA scheme for SPS goods. And that links that information to a goods description. So that goods description could be anything that links into the business's inventory. It could be a plain English goods description of what those goods are. It could be a SKU code. It could be a numerical value, whatever links best into your own inventory records. And what that means is when you are moving those goods, if you are using the TSS, for example, and either yourself or someone doing that on your behalf would only have to give the TSS the goods description alongside your standard commercial information. And that means that TSS can then pre-populate the IMI with that information. So it removes the need to provide commodity codes, removes the need to provide country of origin on a per movement basis. Now, the goods profile will require some maintenance. So obviously it is a trader's responsibility to keep that up to date. So if you have new goods coming into your inventory or things change in terms of where you're sourcing the goods from, then you can update it. However, it's worth also noting that this is a purely optional facilitation that's available. It is not mandatory for you to use the TGP. In fact, it's not mandatory for you to use any of these facilitations, but they are there to try and help businesses with some of the more complex things that are in place under the current arrangements for moving goods into Northern Ireland. Now, the final thing I'd like to touch on before we move on to any questions is around parcels. So if we can move on to the final slide, I think, for me. Thank you. So under the Windsor framework, there are going to be introducing new arrangements for parcels, and that is based on where the goods are being sent to and from. So depending on whether the goods are being sent to or from a consumer or to and from a business, will impact the route that these goods take. As you can see here, if we're moving goods from to a consumer, so either a business to consumer, consumer to consumer, or even a consumer to business, those goods will be able to move under a new UK carrier scheme. And that was generally will be your parcel operators that will be authorised by HMRC for that. And that allows those goods that are moving directly to a consumer in Northern Ireland to do so without the customs formalities in that sense. So it removes the need for a customs declaration for those goods. There is no duty due. There is no safety and security declaration, and there is no requirement to present the goods on entry to Northern Ireland to customs. All of that sort of complex customs process is removed, and the UK carrier scheme will instead provide HMRC with some simple commercial data to show where the goods are going and what is in the parcel, for example. So the standard information that you'll really provide to your parcel carrier now if you're sending parcels. So for goods to benefit from that scheme, there are some weight limits to note. So if you're sending a parcel that has multiple items in it, it can weigh up to 31.5 kilos. If you're moving a parcel with a single item in it, it can weigh up to 100 kilograms. And that's to allow typical things such as white goods, etc., to move under this route and ensure Northern Ireland consumers have access to the GB market for those goods. If you're moving goods from a business to business, the same rules would apply for freight. So the things that I touched on earlier, such as the IMI and UKIMS, are very, very important there. So if you're moving goods through a parcel operator that are going to a business, you will be able to use UKIMS, and that will allow you to benefit from the IMI, which is the reduced data set. As I say, that reduces some of the customs information that has to be provided, including commodity code, etc. So that kind of brings the slides to an end. So I'm very happy to pause there, and I think then we're moving on to Q&A. So I'm happy to pick up any questions that have been prompted by that.
Thank you very much, Sam, useful as ever. Before we head to the Q&A, I'd just like to mention our special interest groups, or SIGs. These are online meetings where you can not only hear from experts like Anna directly, but also connect with like-minded professionals and fellow businesses in the sector to voice any concerns or queries you might have and share best practice. We've also got a request from government directly. I'm going to popping a link in the chat to a survey that's going to feed directly into government to understand their spending priorities in the year ahead. But we have a couple more minutes for the Q&A. So if we can move on to the next slide. So we've got a question from Sam. If I'm already moving goods from GB to non-Ireland, can I continue to follow the same processes I do now instead of using these simplified processes? Simon, to you.
Thanks for that question, Sam. So yes, the answer is yes. So if you have established processes in place for moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, then you're more than welcome to continue to do so. These are facilitations to help with some of the genuine concerns that businesses have raised with us, but it is not mandatory for you to move to the IMI. It is not mandatory to use the Trader's Good profile. You can continue using TSS or another agent as you do now.
Thank you, Simon. Just scrolling through questions, we have one from Daniela. This might be better for you, Anna. How does the electronic presentation of the transit MRN work at GB locations for Office of Transit or Office of Destination?
Oh, thank you. That will depend on whether the goods are arriving through inventory or non-inventory linked locations. At an inventory linked locations, whoever is bringing in the goods will need to present either the paper tag or the barcode for Border Force to scan it. at GVMS locations, it is extremely important that when the goods are arriving into Great Britain, the TAD MRN is included into the GMR, and that is every TAD MRN for all the goods on the truck. So if it's a groupage movement, for instance, and it has multiple TADs, all of the TADs need to be in the GMR, because that is the way in which you electronically present that MRN so that Office of Transit functionality can be performed. Now, that doesn't mean that a driver does not need to go to IBF to discharge the transit movement, but the TAD MRN must be in that GMR.
Thank you very much, Anna. Unfortunately, we are at the witching hour already. We'd said this only lasts 45 minutes. Time flies when we talk about customs. Just one question from Rachel asking for further reading regarding NCTS 5 on HMRC. We'll try to share that in the post-webinar follow-up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have a wonderful Q&A document, FAQ document, but on the NCTS, but also we have some wonderful resources on safety and security as well. There's plenty out there. There's loads of information that we'll be able to share afterwards.
So yeah, Rachel, thanks for your question. I hope that's useful. On the next slide, just to quickly mention membership. Again, if you enjoyed today's session, please do scan the QR code and consider joining us if you haven't already. We do have resources like the one Anna's just mentioned, as well as the daily update, which goes out on a daily basis and covers all kinds of customs knowledge. Business members at the Institute also get access to a wealth of different resources. We have our lunchtime learning program, as mentioned, and there is a Customs Corner Live later on, I believe, next month. We also have the trade helpline and a range of support and other topics too. But thank you for everyone who's staying with me at the moment. Just like to remind you about the post-webinar survey. Please do feed in, as we do greatly value your feedback on these matters. It is a short survey, so very much appreciate you there. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Simon for joining us from HMRC and Anna for joining us from the Institute. I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you ever so much.
Thanks all.